What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. So, quick little video today while I finish up work on the Squire mod project. Hopefully I'll have that done next week and then we can finish that out and I'll kind of show you everything I've had to do to that and the run through of it. If you haven't seen part 1 of that video with the guitar totally stock, go check it out. But yeah, anyway, quick little video this week. I was kind of thinking about what were my top 5 most iconic guitars of all time, right? This is a super subjective list, nothing scientific about this at all, right? This is going to be different for everybody, but these are my top 5 most iconic guitars of all time. So what do I mean when I say that, right? I mean that throughout my life, especially when I was younger, but even so, you know, on into like my 20s and 30s and stuff like that, just the guitars that really kind of got me interested in guitar, and that became these like real grandiose obsessions over the years, you know, right? Like, there's a couple that come to mind, I think, for lots of guitar players, you know. But these are the ones for me specifically. So, the first guitar, I guess we'll go number 5, is going to be, and I'm going to put some pictures in here, you know, to show these guitars, so that I'm not just going to like talk about them. So if you've never seen them before, you don't know, you know, what these guitars are, I will edit some pictures in here, right? So number 5 is David Gilmore from Pink Floyd, the Black Strat. Now, you know, I'm admittedly not much of a Strat guy, and as you will see throughout the rest of this list has a very common theme to it. But I wanted to start off with David Gilmore's Black Strat. One year for Christmas, my dad bought me a book called The Black Strat, and it's a whole book about this guitar, and it's such an interesting thing about how all the things the guitar's been through, all the modifications, numerous necks that have been on the guitar. At one point he gave it to like the Hard Rock Cafe and then he wanted it back, and a few years ago the guitar sold at auction for like a gajillion dollars, you know. It's just one of those guitars. Like, you know, my dad's a big Pink Floyd fan. I've always been a big Pink Floyd fan, and like, no matter what genre of music you're into, like, David Gilmour's guitar tone is just such an iconic thing, and you know, such an iconic guitar tone, such an iconic guitar, like, it's almost synonymous with him. It's hard to even imagine him playing another guitar. Like, that black Fender Stratocaster is just like, in my mind, it is quintessential Pink Floyd. Like, it is the tone for Pink Floyd. So, David Gilmore's Black Stratocaster. It's almost not even worth mentioning what year it is, because it's had so many different necks on it, and I don't think it started out off as anything special. I think it was like a late 60s or early 70s Strat. Nothing super, you know, awesome about it at face value as it was originally, but over the years it just became larger than life. It just became this thing, right? So yeah, David Gilmore's Black Strat. Number 4, and I think this should be pretty obvious, you know, for me anyway, is Randy Rhodes' white Gibson Les Paul Custom. I mean, this just kind of started my whole obsession with Les Paul Customs, but white ones specifically. I just love this guitar. I mean, Randy Rhodes is such a, you know, iconic guitar player. You know, he wasn't here that long. He didn't have a lot of recorded work, but the stuff he did with Ozzy is just absolutely legendary. And that guitar is all over those albums, and it's just such, you know, it's just that image of like Randy on stage with the white guitar, you know, like, I mean, that image is just, like, even people that don't play guitar have seen that image and they know that image. They're like, oh, that's Randy Rhodes. You know, I'm like, it's just so larger than life. That's going to be a phrase I repeat a lot in this video, but it's just so larger than life. Like, you know, you're a kid and you're seeing, you know, like, this is Ozzy from Black Sabbath. This is his, you know, legendary solo guitar player, Randy Rhodes. Like, it's just, yeah, what an iconic instrument. And again, just like a mid-70s Les Paul Custom, not a, you know, crazy desirable year of Les Pauls or anything like that, but just such an iconic guitar in its own right. Number 3, keeping with the theme, Zack Wild from Black Label Society, Ozzy Osbourne, Pantera now, right? Zack Wild's Bullseye Gibson Les Paul Custom. Now, I have a particularly cool story about this guitar, and I'll throw a picture in to show you. When I was like 16 or 17 years old, I don't remember how old I was. I was young. I was like 16 or 17, I think, and maybe 15. I don't know. But anyway, I went to England on a trip, and I'm at the Hard Rock Cafe in London. And as you can see in the picture, I had my Black Label Society shirt on, and the waiter at our Hard Rock Cafe is like, hey, are you a Black Label Society fan? You're a Zack Wild fan. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, do you want to see something cool? And I'm like, sure. And he's like, come across the street with me to this, I think they called it the Vault. It's basically just like a storage place that they kept all of the stuff that they couldn't have in the restaurant, you know. If you've ever been, I don't know if you've ever been to a Hard Rock Cafe or not, but they have all this like music and pop culture memorabilia, guitars from rock stars and outfits from famous musicians and stuff, you know, all over the restaurant, right? So, in hindsight, maybe when you're a 15, 16-year-old kid, don't leave the restaurant you're at and go across the street with some random waiter in a foreign country. That's probably not a good move. But, you know, I told my mom and dad, I was like, hey, I'm going over here, and some of the other people we were with, the other kids, they were like, hey, we want to go too. So he wound up taking like a group of us and like my parents over there. So like it was cool. But he took us over there to this storage place, this vault, where they kept all this stuff that they were either going to ship it to another Hard Rock, or they were about to ship it back to the artist, or they were just waiting on it to kind of rotate out, you know, whatever. And he pulls out this guitar case, and he's like, points at my shirt, and he's like, do you want to see it? And I'm like, see what? And he's like, do you want to see the guitar? And I'm like, you have the guitar? And he's like, yeah. And so they pull it out, and they open the case up, and they give me Zack Wild's Bullseye Les Paul. And I mean, you can see, like, on my face, I was just like beside myself. I didn't even know what to think of it, you know. You know, Randy Rhodes, very iconic for me, but a little before my time. Zack Wild was like prime for me, you know, as a kid in like the late 90s, early 2000s, like listening to Black Label Society, listening to Ozzy Osbourne, getting into metal, like the Bullseye Les Paul. Again, it's one of those guitars that like people that don't know anything about guitar, anything about music, they're like, oh yeah, I've seen the Bullseye. They know the Bullseye Les Paul. Like, they just do it. At this point, that's like Zack's brand almost, right? It's the whole Bullseye thing, right? And that guitar has such a cool story too that I cannot even begin to condense into this short video. But you know, he joined Ozzy when he was like 19 years old, and he was like a tall, you know, skinny, blonde guy, and he was like, I don't want to look like, he's like, I kind of look like Randy Rhodes already. He was like, I don't want to look like Randy Rhodes and play the exact same guitar Randy Rhodes was playing, right? And so he took this guitar, and he wanted to have a paint job done on it for a photo shoot. And originally it was supposed to be a different paint job. I don't know if you've ever seen the Vertigo Les Pauls that he came out with later. That's what the paint job was originally supposed to be, was like that weird Vertigo pattern. And the guy that painted it kind of messed it up. He just painted a Bullseye instead. And it was like the day of the photo shoot, you know, he's being announced as Ozzy's guitar player, all this stuff. And he was like, well, you know, screw it. I just got to roll with it, right? And the rest is history. And that is the Zack Wild Les Paul. I mean, the bullseye thing, right? Like, it's such an iconic guitar. I remember a local music store having, like, the Epiphone version of that when I was a kid. I'd go in there and play it all the time, and I just thought, man, it'd be so cool one day, you know. But such a recognizable guitar, such an iconic guitar, and like so many amazing records, right? Moving on. Number 2. This is kind of a neat one, and the hype around this guitar the past few years has been kind of ridiculous, if I'm being honest, but I get it, right? We're talking about Greeny. Now, Greeny is a 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard, right? A Sunburst Les Paul, wow, right? But the story behind this guitar and its lineage is just so fascinating to me, right? Like, Peter Green, one of the founders of the band Fleetwood Mac, and he gets this guitar. And so, short little condensed history on Peter Green real quick. He joined John Mayall and the Blues Breakers after Eric Clapton left. Him and Eric were kind of flip-flopped around in the band a little bit. But Eric Clapton was on the Beano album with his, in its own right, iconic Sunburst Les Paul. And he wasn't in the band long. He made that one record and he left. So Mayall's going to tour on this record, and he needs a guitar player. He gets Peter Green. So Peter Green has to learn all this Eric Clapton material, and he needs a guitar that can do it, and he gets this Sunburst Les Paul. And there was something, you know, this is one of those kind of like things of a legend, right? No one really knows what the deal with it was, whether the front pickup died or it needed a repair or whatever it was. Somehow or another, the magnet in the neck pickup got flipped around the wrong way. And so when you're on the bridge pickup, works fine. When you're on the neck pickup, works fine. When you put it in the middle position, you know, like Les Pauls have a, see, let me grab one of mine real quick. You know, Les Pauls have this 3-way pickup selector. So on Greeny, like bridge pickup, great. Neck pickup, great. When you go to the middle position and you have both pickups, they're out of phase. And when the two pickups are in phase with each other, that means the magnet polarities are working with each other. I'm not going to get into like the in-depth science of this because it's super nerdy, but you know, they sound fine, they sound good and full, and all that jazz, right? When they're out of phase, the magnets are kind of like working opposite one another. They don't really want to work with each other. And it's a really easy fix. I got to just pull the magnet out, turn around, stick it back in the right way, and you're fine. But this kind of became Peter Green's like signature tone. He would use this middle position all the time with these two pickups out of phase, and it was a very unique tone for a Les Paul. And it kind of became his signature thing. And then over the years, he wound up selling that guitar to a guy named Gary Moore. And Gary Moore was in the band Thin Lizzy for a while, and he had his own super prolific solo career and some amazing blues records. And Gary had the guitar forever. He had it for a long time. And it became just as recognizable as Gary Moore's guitar as it had been Peter Green's guitar. To the point where a lot of, a whole different generation of musicians look at that like it's Gary Moore's guitar. A lot of musicians look at it like it's Peter Green's guitar, but there's a whole generation of musicians that view that as Gary Moore's guitar because he used it so prolifically in his career. Gary sold the guitar years and years down the road, and it kind of went around the collector circuit, and it wound up in some private collections here and there, and then it wound up getting sold to Kirk Hammett from Metallica, and Kirk Hammett currently owns the guitar, And as you know, Gibson has done a gajillion different signature versions of it. There was like the crazy $50,000 custom shop versions. There was the $20,000 custom shop version. There's the $3,000 USA standard version. There's the $1,500 Epiphone version now. It's like Gibson is like milking Greeny for everything they can milk it for. And I don't have an issue with that because it's a very iconic guitar. It's a very legendary guitar that has such a prestigious lineage of like 3 super famous, prolific guitar players, right? So there are tons of people who want to own a version of this guitar because it was Peter Green's, or because it was Gary Moore's, or because it's Kirk Hammett's now, right? Like, the guitar has just taken on such a life of its own, even outside of the guitarist that owned it. So I think that kind of makes it unique. Even though it's not number 1 on my list, I think it makes it unique out of all the other guitars just because of, you know, there's a lot of guitars that like one person owned and they owned it and that's it. But this guitar has taken on such a life of its own. It's kind of become its own entity, and, you know, who knows where it'll wind up in 50 years. Who knows who will have it then, right? Like, so, super legendary guitar, super iconic guitar, and out of all the guitars on this list, it's arguably responsible for the biggest catalog of prolific music. So, that's one thing unique about Greeny. But for me personally, and this is especially as of late, again, I was never really into this band as a kid. You know, like, peripherally a little bit. But within the past 5 years, I've become super into this band. Super into this guitar player, his playing style, his technique, his tone, everything. And so number 1 for me is going to be Adam Jones from Tool's 1979 Silver Burst Gibson Les Paul Custom. Shocker, right? That's why I bought this. That's why I bought my own Murphy Lab. I had 2 of the Adam Jones Epiphones, and I loved both those guitars. They were great guitars. I had the art one, and then I had the inspired by a custom shop one with the Gibson headstock and everything, you know. But they just made me want to go big and go with the Murphy Lab Silver Burst. I wasn't going to go big and get the Adam Jones one that cost like 20 grand, right? But I think Adam has kind of personified like the modern guitar icon. You know, a huge generation of guitar players are obsessed with Tool. Obviously, they're one of the biggest bands in the world, and for a band that weird and unique to be that big and that famous is a feat. Like, that's just not something that happens a lot. Right? Like, they're not a 3-4 chord pop rock radio band. Like, they're a very progressive, prolific band. And their music is kind of challenging and difficult to get into at times. And so for them to be that big and that famous, and for Adam Jones to be that influential and iconic in the guitar scene, is kind of mind-boggling, really. And focusing more on the guitar, this was never a popular finish for Les Pauls when it came out in the 70s. No one cared. People didn't like it. They thought it was a weird finish. They didn't dig it. And Adam Jones has said he was able to pick these guitars up for, you know, super cheap because no one wanted them. Even though they're super rare. So this is a great example of a rarity doesn't equal value. They didn't make a lot of Silver Bursts. The reason they didn't make a lot is because no one wanted them. People wanted black Les Paul Customs, white Les Paul Customs, sunburst Les Paul Customs, you know, whatever. Like, nobody wanted Silver Burst until Adam Jones blew up and Tool blew up. And, you know, he said some goofy things about him, like in interviews he would talk about how he thought that the paint job affected the tone and stuff like that. Like, he was just trolling people, right? But like it added to kind of like that mysteriousness of the guitar. And you know, there are a lot of guitar players that bounce around between guitars. Even some of these other musicians we've talked about over the years, they've played multiple guitars, different kinds of guitars. Adam almost exclusively plays like vintage Silver Burst Les Paul Customs. You know, I know he's got a couple I've seen him with. It's not just the 79, but the 79 is one of the most consistent ones for him. I mean, he plays that guitar all the time. Like, he's like, it's my favorite guitar, it's the one I play. The rest of them are just there if I need them, you know? It's like, that's his guitar. And it is just responsible for some incredibly interesting music. Like, the things he's written on that guitar, some of the stuff he's done with that guitar is just so interesting to me. I mean, that's really the only word. Like, Tool's music is so interesting. It's the kind of music you can listen to, and as a musician, you can listen to it and really pick it apart and analyze it and kind of get lost in the technicality of it. But where a lot of bands, I feel like, are so technical that they kind of lose some of their songwriting and their, like, approachableness, Tool doesn't. Like, these are still very well written songs. It's not just like a look what we can do session. Look how good we are. Like, there's real songs in there, and they're good songs, and they're well written and crafted. And, you know, it isn't just scales and exercises and pyrotechnic, you know, guitar pyrotechnics, if you will, right? Like, they're writing good songs. They just happen to be these very long, prolific, like, progressive, interesting songs. And that 79 Silverburst Les Paul Custom is right in the middle of all of it. And to me, it's just such an iconic guitar. You know, it's the background on my computer screen right behind the camera here. It's like, you know, I have my own custom shop Silverburst now, and this has become my main guitar. Like, I just love this guitar, and, you know, yeah, I think Silverburst is such a cool finish. So, anyway, those are my top 5 most iconic guitars. There's a bunch of guitars I left off this list, obviously. So, let me know what your favorite iconic guitars are, right? Like, I know I didn't talk about Jimmy Page, I didn't talk about Tony Iommi, I didn't really talk about Eric Clapton, like, I didn't talk about Jimi Hendrix, like, I didn't talk about Slash, you know. There's a lot of guitars I didn't talk about, so maybe down the road we can make another video about iconic guitars, but at the moment, these are kind of the ones that, in my mind, just, they kind of hold some other, you know, place of, like, mystique to me, right? So, if you like this kind of content, subscribe to the channel, like the video. Like I said, let me know what some of your favorite iconic guitars are, right? Eddie Van Halen Frankenstrat, Dimebag Darrell, Dean from Hell. You know, there's a lot of super iconic guitars out there. So let me know what your favorites are. And thank y'all for tuning into the video. And I will be back next week.